This morning's reading is taken from Mark chapter 1, beginning at verse 29, and I'm reading from the New International Bible. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went up to her and took her hand and helped her up. The fever left her and she began to wait on them. That evening, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all who were ill and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed them who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to find a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so that I can preach there also. That is why I have come." So he traveled through Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out the demons.
There's nothing nicer than basking in a job well done, is there? Sometimes we can spend an awful long time on a particular project. We put a lot of effort into something, and when it all goes well, we just want to kick back, to relax, and to enjoy the moment. I just wonder if Jesus ever felt like that in his ministry. The story we've just heard from Mark 1 is a case in point, when we kind of need to think about what came immediately before that. Jesus had entered Capernaum, and he'd been teaching in a synagogue. And if you remember, he'd been confronted by an evil spirit who'd recognized him as the Holy One of God. Jesus, well, he just exorcised that spirit and sent him away. And we're told the people were amazed by his authority. Now, I don't know about you, but I would count teaching in synagogue, exorcising an evil spirit, leaving crowds of people truly amazed as quite a good morning's work. And after all that, I'm sure that Jesus just wanted, what I'd want to do is go and put my feet up somewhere. And so in this morning's gospel reading, Jesus and the disciples leave the synagogue and they go back to Simon's house. Time for a bit of relaxation. Not really, because there we have in verses 30 to 32, Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told Jesus about her. So he goes up to her, takes her hand and helps her up. The fever left her and she began to wait upon them. A fascinating story. What have we got to learn from it? Well, there are three things that I want to bring from this. That's just the way we taught. I'm sorry. If I go where just leave you two, then I'm going to feel as though I haven't done the job right. So there we are. So this is training of 30 years ago. You must always give them 3 points. Yeah, whatever. And hopefully they connect it somewhere along the way. But it's not rocket science, what I'm going to share with you today as I read this particular passage. Firstly, for me, it says something about Jesus meeting us in the ordinariness of our lives. We're told in verse 29, it was the house of Simon and Andrew, and they went with James and John. And of course, they are the first disciples to be called in Mark chapter 1 earlier on. As Jesus called them, he said, "Follow me." And we are told that Simon and Andrew left their nets and followed him. And then just a couple of verses later, we're told James and John left their father Zebedee and followed him. Now, when we read those words, I think we get the feeling that they just decided to leave everything, just put everything behind them, and everything was kind of this. That was it. That was from the past. But the reading this morning suggests something completely different, because Simon was clearly married, because he had a mother-in-law. He also, moving on, he also owned a house. So in a sense, they left everything to follow Jesus, but that doesn't necessarily mean they ran away from their domestic responsibilities. They had family, they had property, and it was right for them to still behave with responsibility to those. But what's interesting in a metaphorical sense is that Jesus comes into Simon's house. He's entering there the domestic world of his followers. And so it is with us, because God enters into our world. He enters our domestic lives. He enters the ordinary lives that we have. Being a follower of Jesus isn't some mystical, transcendental experience that takes us out of our responsibilities of this world. Being a follower of Jesus means that God comes into our ordinary lives and he ministers to us in that ordinary way, in the everyday. Isn't that what the incarnation is all about? The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And in Revelation, of course, we find those amazing words. Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with them and they with me. So it's not good sort of thinking the ordinary things of our lives are something to look down upon. We are not to regret in any way our domesticity or even to see it as a barrier to our relationship with God. For if we want to meet with God, he is there alongside us in the everyday, and he finds us where we are. So Jesus is somebody who meets us there in the ordinary things of life. But I also want to bring out the second thing I would want to say is this. Jesus is very considerate to our needs. Now, that might seem like a very obvious thing, but I just want to kind of spend a moment upon that. When I was in North Norfolk, one of my colleagues was trying to get a leaking garage sorted. So she phoned around, as you would do, the local tradesman to get a quote for the works. But the fact is that nobody at all wanted to put a quote in. They all said the same thing. The job's too small. Too small for them, maybe, but not too small for her. So the tradesmen were viewing the work that needed to be done from their perspective, not from the perspective of considering my colleague's need. Now, here was Jesus. Just hold on to that for a moment. Now, here was Jesus. He's been teaching at the synagogue. He's exorcised an evil spirit. He had left a huge crowd of people in amazement at his authority. He confounded the teachers of the law. His fame was spreading throughout the region as each minute passed. And then he gets to Simon's house and he's told, oh, my mother-in-law has a fever. We might have to knock up a couple of sandwiches, lads. A Norfolk tradesman would have probably thought, that's a shame. I hope she gets better soon, but that job's too small for me. But for the carpenter from Nazareth, no job is too small. So he goes up the stairs and he heals the woman who's got a fever. And he does that because he was not motivated for his own perspective, but he was going to the person in need. It's easy for us to discount the suffering of others because the pain in some ways can seem quite small in comparison to our own pain or to the pain of the wider world. But pain is pain. Whatever it might seem to us to be large or small, if we are to be in any sense Christ-like, we are called to address the pain and the suffering wherever we might find it. Not to judge that pain or compare it, that's not our responsibility, but to alleviate the suffering of others, because no job is too small. So Jesus is somebody who meets us in the ordinary things of our lives. And Jesus is so considerate of our particular needs. And then thirdly and finally, I think I'd want to say this. Jesus is somebody who shows deep compassion to us. It's been interesting over the last weeks preparing services and sermons for quite a few services, because over and over again, I'm finding myself being challenged by the whole theme of physical touch. Touch is such an important pastoral gift, and we see it again in this passage. Jesus went up to the lady, he took her hand, and he helped her up. As a hospital chaplain of many years, it's a normal thing for me to ask to hold someone's hand or to be able to touch their shoulder, perhaps anoint their head with oil, whatever that might be. Touch is vitally important. I'm not sure if I've told the story here, but I'll just quickly tell it again because I'm getting it in my head and I'm seeing it in glorious technicolor as I'm speaking. So I better tell the story because otherwise I'll go away and regret it. I was called at, as you do, something at 1 o'clock in the morning. The bleeps go. They had a wonderful way to the hospital in the Bristol Royal Infirmary because they had my mobile phone, they had my normal telephone, I had a radio page and I had a bleep. And how they did it, because all 4 of those things would go at one time. Obviously, they thought I was quite lazy and they're not going to wake up. So all those 4 things, not knowing what to turn off first. Yes, I'm awake. What do you want? There's somebody in need, somebody who's dying on one of the wards. Please go. So, not ready. Went to that particular ward. This is a normal thing. It happened most of the times we're on call. Went in, the nursing sister said, Colin, this person has asked that before he dies, he's anointed with oil. Okay, so I went down, got the oil stock out, went up to the gentleman. He was in the last moments, really, of life. Not expected to make it through the night, in no way. So I anointed him with oil in the way that I was expected to do. And I left knowing that there would come a time, because the other thing they'd asked for was when this person had died, this is a family, when he died, he would like to have a blessing said over his body before they took him away. So I kind of went away thinking, I'm not sure how much more sleep I'm going to get tonight before I get home, get the call, get back to the hospital. Anyway, 8 o'clock in the morning, I kind of woke up. They always expected if we were called out in the night, we were allowed to miss prayers at 9 o'clock. So I did a lot of missing prayers. So, and you catch up with the colleagues at 10 o'clock whenever you got in. So I woke up at 8 o'clock thinking, hang on, what's gone on here? So I thought, they haven't rung me, have they? I thought, that's great, that's wonderful. So I marched into the ward and I was a little bit cross. And I said to the sister, said, excuse me, you were going to call me last night. You haven't called me. And she said, well, yeah, well, look. What? Look. What am I looking at? Just go in the room and have a look. Okay, fine. So I went into the room and there he is. This gentleman sat up with his cornflakes, giving it what for. I thought they've changed this is not the same person. Surely this is not the same person. He was in the last throes of life. So I said to him, excuse me, I said, I'm the Reverend Colin Sherwood. Ah, yes, he recognized you. I recognize your voice. God healed me last night. Whoa, hang on a second. He says, he heard your voice, and he says, and heaven just opened in front of me. And he said, and I was blessed, and I was told, this is not my time, and you healed me. I said, for God's sake, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody at all. Because I could just imagine the doctors saying, oh, he healed him. Why can't he heal him? So when they kind of say, well, there's no hope, bring Colin in. Right. I thought, I'm not going to go for that. And it was kind of, but it was like an amazing moment. And he says, God has healed me. And amazingly, that man, a few days later, went home rejoicing. I have no idea how that happened. I was kind of gobsmacked for days. I really couldn't. And the amount of times I prayed in the way that I prayed for that gentleman when I laid hands on him, when I anointed him with oil. And yet, it wasn't just a one-off. It certainly wasn't a one-off. But, these things didn't happen kind of all the time. But, the fact is, touch is very important. And on that day, it needed touch. And in that touch, God's grace came and met that man in a wonderful way, filled him with his spirit, sent him out home rejoicing to work for God's glory. Amazing. Praise God. Great. But I think it goes sometimes beyond touch as well, because I think sometimes it's about body language. I'm somebody who reads body language. I get a sense of people's, what people are trying to say to me. There are times when I think they kind of shut you off. They don't want to know, kind of thing. I think sometimes it's kind of, you've got to work with that body language. Sometimes people are receptive and open and want to have a conversation. Sometimes people are just being polite and actually know, and now is the time to disappear. But body language is really important. I've been to, well, in fact, I know of a church who seem to think that they're the most welcoming church in the whole of the circuit. But I'm going to tell you, in fact, I told them last week, don't look where I was preaching last week, that actually they're mistaken. Because actually there are people in the circuit who tell me I wouldn't step a foot into that place, their most unwelcoming congregation. And yet the congregation seem to think, and lots of people do, because they found a wonderful welcome. But as somebody says, if your face fits, you're okay. What's the body language saying in all of that? Because I know several people who've come into that church and haven't necessarily found the welcome they were seeking. Very difficult when you're a minister and you're not there every week, because you can't do these things. And last week I was aware that I walked into a room, there was somebody sitting on their own, only been coming for 6 weeks. What on earth? What are we doing? Other people sitting around chatting in their tables, and this is what human beings do, don't they? We get into people who we like and we know and all the rest of it, and there's those people on the outside. And I was able to say to somebody, excuse me, come here. Will you please go and sit with that person and have a chat? And afterwards, this lady came and said, oh, that was so wonderful, amazing what happened in that conversation. It was just the right conversation to have that morning. Come on, let's be, what is our body language saying as individuals, as a church? It's so important because we know, when people are really interested in us. I'm going to share with you a dilemma I've got at the moment. Diane and I went last week. We've been very concerned about Fishy. Now, you'll have heard about Fishy because there's Fishy and a Sylvester. Sylvester is the bearded dragon. Fishy is the fishy. Well, says it all really. Fishy is a fish, a goldfish, a big goldfish. And his tank's been going green. Somebody last week thought I said the fish was going green. No, the fish is still a goldfish, but the tank is going green. And so I have sought some help. And I went to, I looked on websites and I was finding it, and I thought, oh, this is a perfect place, this pet store, wonderful. I don't have to travel, but actually I needed some advice. It said, they don't give a damn. People, all these things said, no, don't bother. They just go through the motions. They're not really interested in your animals and things. Well, I'm not going there then. Not going there, that says that. So, and there was lots of these things, and some of the comments were not good. And I thought, I'm not going there. It might seem as though they're professionals, but actually with those kind of reviews now. And I found another one, which is a much smaller outfit. And they said, all of the reviews were saying, wonderful, wonderful people. They really do care about your fish. I thought, that's the place I need to go. And soon as we walked in, and we started, we wandered around, and I went up to this gentleman and said, I've got a problem with my fish. And it was when he went into first aid mode, and he was brilliant. He was pretty much weeping on the desk for our fish. And it was like the kind of the compassion and the love and the mercy that this man was emitting over my fish. And my fish is everything to me. So he's been a good partner for me for about 8 years, I think. And it's kind of like, where are you going to go? Are you going to go to the person who says, well, on this particular stuff, if you put this in, well, yeah, it might work. There you go, 1050, whatever. Or somebody say to you, well, we could say to go for that, but actually that would be a complete waste of time. What your fish needs is this. And he needs some love from you. All right, I'm prepared to give the love. Okay, whatever it needs. If I need to sit up with him all night, I'll sit up with him all night. No, sir, that's not necessary. Just turn the light off and leave him in the dark for a while. But he's really tearing on my heartstrings at the moment because he keeps coming to the tank and saying, Dad, why am I in darkness? And my heart is breaking, but I can see the water starting to clear. And we put this stuff in, which will make all the difference. Where are you going to go? Just like the church. Are you going to go somewhere somebody says, we're really concerned. We have so much compassion and love for you because Jesus himself gave his all for you. These songs are reminding us of Jesus' incredible sacrifice that he made for you and for me. Makes all the difference. Or are we going to go somewhere where we kind of say, well, you're just one of a number? We're not one of a number. We are called to look after one another, to look out for one another. We have God who is interested in our dilemma, the God who shows compassion to us. So let's be encouraged. Let's be encouraged today. The Apostle Paul was a driven man. I'm finishing now. Christ's love for him gave him an obligation everywhere to preach the gospel by whatever means. He said this, I've become all things to all people so that I might by any means save some. I do it for the sake of the gospel so that I may share in its blessings. So as we pursue mission in our communities, as we live out our lives in ordinary ways, let us do so in the knowledge of how Christ dealt with Simon's mother-in-law. Let's see everybody as being important. And let's show that Christ-like compassion. And may God fill us as individuals and as a church with the power of his Holy Spirit, that we might live and indeed work to further his kingdom in this place for Christ's sake. Amen.